Every day, people influence you. Friends, coworkers, ads, even random strangers. And you don't even notice how you start thinking thoughts that aren't really yours. Today, I'm going to tell you about the psychology of influence. And after this video, you'll never look at people the same way again. If you don't understand how influence works, you're already under it. But if you do, you can control situations, conversations, even relationships. By the way, in my next videos, I'll talk about relationships between men and women, about the psychology of love, manipulation, and how to get your ex back without losing your self-respect. But for now, drop a like and hit subscribe so you don't lose me in the depths of YouTube. Get comfortable. We're getting started. Psychotechnics is a branch of psychology that studies how psychological factors influence human behavior and activity. This field became widely known about 100 years ago, thanks to a group of German scientists. According to them, the main goal of using psychotechnics was to help a person choose the right profession and to train specialists capable of performing specific professional tasks. Psychotechnics, or psychological manipulation, is a form of social and psychological influence on an individual. The purpose of this influence is to change another person's perception or behavior. You can think of psychotechnics as mathematical formulas, precise methods that, when applied correctly, always lead to predictable results. Psychotechniques aren't magic. They're just tools. You can roughly split them into several groups: hypnotic techniques, zombification techniques, verbal psychotechniques, techniques for manipulating the psychic consciousness, and methods of self-suggestion. In this video, I'll talk about verbal techniques and manipulation of the psychic consciousness. Hypnosis, zombification, and self-suggestion techniques are covered in a separate video of mine, and that one is definitely not for YouTube. Its practice involves prohibited methods and various psychoactive substances, and I even go into detail about their kitchen synthesis. I might leave a link under this video if a lot of people want to see it. Arguments, debates, persuasion, reasoning, principles, offers, objections, protests. How do you come out on top? There are countless ways to change someone's mind, to shift your partner's position during a negotiation or even a casual conversation. You can try convincing someone for a long time, stubbornly proving your point, or you can persuade them gently, guiding them toward your way of thinking. But sometimes you can finish a discussion, negotiation, or argument very quickly and still get the result you want if you find the right words and images that leave no room for disagreement. One of the quickest and most effective persuasion techniques is called the truism technique. A truism is a commonly known truth, a statement so obvious that no one questions it. The psychology behind this technique lies in the fact that our subconscious minds are filled, from early childhood, with stereotypes, sayings, and cliches. Little truths we've heard all our lives. No one argues with them because they carry the wisdom of generations. For example, it's a freezing winter day. At a subway station, a man is selling warm sweaters, neatly packaged. But he doesn't shout, "Buy one." Instead, he says, "What a cold day." Warm sweaters at low prices. Everyone's buying these beautiful sweaters. The sales pitch sounds effortless. Let's break it down. He starts with something undeniable. It's cold outside. Our subconscious immediately agrees. Yes. Then he adds that the sweaters are beautiful and well packaged. Another yes. And the price is low. Yes again. If your subconscious has already said yes several times, chances are you'll buy the sweater. Using truisms is a real art, but it's an art you can master with practice. Over time, you'll learn to build entire chains of truisms, and you'll be able to persuade almost anyone with ease. The illusion of choice technique comes from neurolinguistic programming, or NLP. NLP has long been used by intelligence agencies and negotiators because with it, it's easy to subtly manipulate human consciousness. The technique itself is very simple, yet incredibly effective. The idea is to structure your conversation so that the other person feels like they're making their own decision, even though in reality, you've already made it for them. During the dialogue, you need to frame your questions in a way that anticipates their reaction, guiding them toward a yes. To do that, you offer them several options to choose from: actions, situations, feelings, but none of those options include refusal. For example, would you prefer to sign the contract in the morning or in the afternoon? Do you want the large pack or the small one? In the election, are you voting for Trump or for Harris? It seems like the customer, the voter, or the negotiator has a choice. But in reality, that choice is limited by time, quantity, or form, and never by the option to say no. The command hidden in a question technique works like this. Our subconscious naturally resists direct orders. Most people don't like being told what to do, so when they hear a command, they tend to ignore it or push back. But if you disguise the command as a question, the subconscious doesn't recognize it as an order, and the person is far more likely to comply. For example, will you be paying by credit card or cash? It's still a directive, but phrased as a question, so it feels like a choice. And if you turn a command into a polite request, it becomes almost impossible to refuse. Compare these two. Close the door versus, could you please close the door? It's really cold in here. The first one might get you a reply like, close it yourself, but the second one will almost always work. The next one is the SPY method. If you want your target to forget your question, ask it in the middle of the conversation. But if you want them to remember it, place it at the very beginning, or better yet, at the end of the dialogue. Our brains naturally remember what they heard first and last, and tend to forget what was said in the middle. The three stories technique is somewhat like the SPY method. Here's how it works. You tell your target three stories, but you don't tell them in a normal, linear way. You start the first story, then in the middle, you abruptly stop and begin the second. You cut off the second story right at its midpoint and launch into the third. You take the third story all the way to its ending. Then casually, you return to the first story and finish it. After that, you remember the second one and finish that too. What happens is a special kind of psychological programming. The first and second stories are processed consciously and remembered, while the third story slips into the subconscious. And that's exactly what the manipulator is after. Over time, the third story will play its role. It contains embedded commands and suggestions that the person will carry out later, believing firmly that the decision was their own. I strongly recommend learning this technique. It's very effective and often helps people get the result they want. Another popular manipulation technique is the false repetition method, also known as deceptive clarification. The essence of this technique is simple. The manipulator pretends to be very interested in the other person's statement or opinion, but acts as if they didn't quite understand something. Then they begin to repeat the person's words, but only partially. In doing so, they insert their own phrasing, subtly changing the meaning of what was said to suit their own agenda. That's why it's so important to listen carefully to what people say. If you notice that someone has distorted or rephrased your words, correct them immediately. And if the manipulator pretends not to notice your correction, end the conversation or change the topic right away. The intentional haste or topic jumping technique works like this. The manipulator needs to deliver a certain message or suggestion to their target, but in such a way that the person doesn't focus on it or pay conscious attention at the moment. To achieve this, right after saying the key phrase, the manipulator quickly switches to another topic in the conversation. As a result, the target's conscious mind shifts to the new subject, while the initial message sinks into the subconscious level. And as we all know, anything that settles in the subconscious eventually rises to the surface, becoming part of one's conscious thoughts and even personal beliefs. Moreover, if the manipulator delivers their message with emotional intensity, they also encode it, effectively placing a mental anchor, as it's called in neuro-linguistic programming, NLP. The pseudo-inattentiveness method works as follows. The manipulator is actually very interested in the offer or topic being discussed, but during the meeting, they deliberately act indifferent and inattentive. Seeing this apparent lack of interest, the target, the object, instinctively begins to prove their point, trying harder and harder to justify their position. They start giving away more and more details and arguments, even those they originally intended to keep to themselves. And that's exactly what the manipulator wants, those additional facts and insights. This reaction is deeply rooted in human psychology. When we feel that others don't recognize our correctness or importance, we subconsciously push harder to defend our viewpoint and earn acknowledgement. To avoid falling for this trap, one must strengthen self-control. Stay calm, measured, and don't reveal more than planned, no matter how indifferent the other person seems. The false weakness or feigned helplessness method works like this. Every human naturally has an instinct not to fear or attack someone who appears weak. Manipulators exploit this instinct. They intentionally present themselves as vulnerable, insecure, or harmless, triggering a feeling of sympathy and leniency in their target. When our mind perceives someone as weak, it automatically lowers its guard. We stop taking that person seriously, and our critical thinking relaxes. As a result, all the information coming from the manipulator bypasses conscious filters and goes straight into the subconscious. Later, the target may start acting on these embedded suggestions, following the manipulator's will, all while believing the actions were their own idea. To resist this method, you must stay alert and analytical, no matter how harmless or humble someone appears. Always take your opponents seriously, even when they pretend to be weak. The excessive suspiciousness method works like this. The manipulator deliberately acts overly cautious and distrustful when discussing or deciding something. They might question your motives, doubt your honesty, or act as if they suspect you of hiding something. The natural reaction of most people is to start justifying themselves, explaining, proving, convincing. But in doing so, the target's psychological defenses weaken. Once that happens, the manipulator can easily slip their suggestions and beliefs into the target's subconscious, shaping their perception or decisions. To defend yourself against this manipulation, stay calm and confident. Don't fall into the trap of over-explaining or proving your innocence. This is exactly what the manipulator wants. If after seeing your confidence, the manipulator decides to back off or leave, let them go. It means the control attempt failed. All these psycho techniques I've mentioned are just a small part of a vast collection that exists out there. They're not magic, and they're not supernatural powers. They're tools. Tools used by politicians, negotiators, advertisers, and sometimes by ordinary people. You encounter them every day, in conversations, at work, in the news, in relationships. When you understand how influence works, you stop being a victim. You begin to see through people, to recognize when someone is manipulating you and when they're simply trying to persuade. And most importantly, you learn to control attention, words, and emotions. But remember, power is not just the ability to influence. Real power is awareness. Use this knowledge not to manipulate, but to protect yourself and stay in control. If you found this interesting, hit the like button, subscribe, and I'll tell you about hypnotic techniques, self-suggestion, and the hidden codes of speech, the kind YouTube doesn't really like to talk about. Now, just look around. Influence is everywhere. The only question is, who's in control? You or someone else? And now, I'll say goodbye until our next meeting, which as always will be very soon.